His Royal Majesty to for Asante Henana or said to Vice Chancellor of KNST, Vice Chancellor, Ministers. I shall try to sketch my thoughts around the 18th and 19th century. My interest is fundamentally more focused on Kumasi. One of our sisters, Edwards, who is a PhD candidate from the diaspora, has done something very significant, and I shall use her point on the setting of Kumasi and the palace prior to 1874. The 19th century cosmopolitan city of the Asante and Kumasi was a well-built metropolis and economic center, covering 1 mile north to the south and 3/4 of a mile in width. The monumental amphitheater, which is the palace of the Asante, was located on a hill in the city center, measuring 1,500,000 square feet and covering 34 acres. The east edge of the imperial residence was the sacred Supreme River, the Supreme River deities and Asante place where you worship Tradiampo. Even to the immediate west, strategically positioned throughout the lush garden landscape of the Asante city were elaborately Asante designed buildings and residences belonging to royal chiefs and courtiers to the king. The Asante city in the Eburu was not demarcated by walls like the typical imperial cities. The architecture of the noblemen's houses surrounding the residence, the dense forest, and the Sugar River formed an invisible defense against invaders. European surveyors and religious and diplomatic visitors were in awe of the vast forest landscape and the symbolic, aesthetic, and technical beauty of the structures as they entered the city. However, the position of the Asante city and surrounding natural and architectural elements was more than what was visible. The imperial metropolis of the Asante was laid with spiritual, cultural, and security values to the nation. Indeed, Kumasi represented the traditional political capital of the forest state of Asante, as well as the residents of the Asante. The Oyoko royals, all important Kumasi office holders and functionaries, stayed there and performed services associated with the Kumasi court, and their conjugal families resided in Kumasi. Again, it is significant to note that Kumasi was also the cultural capital. In this capacity, the atmosphere of Kumasi was characterized by elegance or sophistication, as initially noted. In fact, in 1874, the British, led by Sir Kenneth Wolseley, defeated Asante and ransacked Kumasi. The election of Prempeh I as Asante, which began 10 years after the Sagrenti War, was marked by a civil war and eventual deportation and exile with key Asante leaders in 1896, first to Sierra Leone and finally to the island of May in Seychelles. British attempts to break Asante and impose their hegemony on Asante did not end with Prempeh's exile. From 1900 to 1901, in the last Asante War of Independence against the British, Asante was defeated and placed under the control of the governor of the Gold Coast. The British then instituted measures and institutions that started the colonization of Kumasi, which they retained as the capital of Asante. May I, as a point of emphasis, say that when you look at the broader community or society of Kumasi, even though we have the Asante, with his mind and his abilities, the society was equally egalitarian, so that you had members of the community, from office holders to those who held no office or position. To that extent, we understand that Asante also had different people crisscrossing. In fact, Kumasi historically was opened up to Hausa, Mande traders, and different people from different regions and territories prior to the 18th century and to the 19th century. Kumasi remained an entrepot, so to speak, where different ideas radiated. As a matter of fact, the formation and the founding of Kumasi out of Kwaman, where the Asante Constitution was fully firmed up, gives us a very clear impression about the fact that the Asante and the eminent chiefs who resided in their specific social and political jurisdiction agreed to that constitution which brought about the Asante Union. An idea that was alien to the European, because the European assumed that the Asante Union came about only through war, and assumed that the Asante Union could be compared to that, for example, of the European kings or monarchs who might have had their territories or spheres through dint of war. As a matter of fact, this constitution, I dare say, and challenge the discussion, ran around to the Magna Carta. In that respect, its authority was so binding in the sacred spirituality is that which was also missing in the minds of the European in many respects. Asante from Kumasi was interested in diplomacy, and so before even war, there will be diplomatic engagements, there will be discussions, there will be emissaries, and this subsisted since the time of Osetutu the First Asante. So the critical question, therefore, is to ask, why did the British arrest Asante after 1874? Just to jump into other discussions. What had changed on the side of the British? By 1800, I know that the chair is looking at me, I apologize. The 19th century began with, the railway, Osetutu found his slave. And we understand that there were a lot of interesting dynamics in terms of diplomacy. In fact, his peaceful relations between the British is well documented. In fact, Kumasi in this period received 3 European missions, which included individuals like William Hyde Copper in 1816. Then we have Frederick James, Thomas Edward Bowditch, William Hutchinson, and Henry Tedley in 1817, and Joseph Dupuy, Francis Collins, Benjamin Salmon, and David Mills Graves in 1820. So Kumasi was the heart of diplomacy in the territory referred to as Asante and the broader enclave of it. So that is an suffice it, right? That these diplomatic missions had one goal: to negotiate for peace, to ensure that there was sometimes an uneasy truce between themselves and their neighbors, including the British. So 19th century diplomacy in Kumasi took a rather different form, nature, and approach over a period of time. It was associated with a changing political scene, especially with the growing influence of Europeans at the coast. So diplomacy, which is effectively known in the modern sense, which requires that you have a representation in a territory negotiating for peace among other social, economic, and political dynamics, subsisted within Asante. In fact, from about the 1760s onwards, Kumasi had brought, conquest, and received rent from Christian broadcasters from the Dutch. But beyond this period, we see that the space between the 1800s, there was negotiations, and also there were ideas of war and diplomacy which subsisted. And some of these, reports have been perfectly written and documented by the good Professor of Erudition, McCaskey. Now, the peaceful relations between Asante and the British in the first 2 decades of the century took a different turn. What happened? Why did it take a different turn? Why would Kumasi go to war? We know about Asante interest in that holding at Emina. We also understand that the interest of the British was to ensure that Asante's control or influence, or better still hegemony, at the coastal regions will be dealt with once and for all. The question is interesting. Why 1874? Why post 1874? And why did the British not annex Asante in 1874? Now, if you look at the account of Ward and Kimberley and the others who have written extensively on that, including Professor McCaskey himself, whom I referred to, it's critical to note that it was an expeditious mission. The team with Wesley arrived in the territory referred to as the colony by January, the end of January, came as far as to Asante by the 1st of January. By the 6th of January, mission accomplished. They returned through Formina, where I come from, signed. The treaty was not signed, it was a treaty he would even leave because he was not signed. The story that I found the ring has already been shared by Professor McCaskey. Now, you understand that it was an expeditious mission, they returned hurriedly, and it did not suggest to us that they were there to stay. Secondly, the terms of the agreement itself, or the truce itself, or the treaty itself, also suggest a very interesting thing, because it did not tell us that the British wanted to have an emissary or a resident commissioner in Kumasi and for that matter, Asante. Now, this notwithstanding, you see a disputation, especially when the Dubai writes in a later period and argues that the British were interested in supporting Asante. That is why he argues that they will support Adansi breakaway, they will support the Gabin boundary and all the other boundaries that were emerging within the state. In fact, if you shift towards Kindle's argument, there is a suggestion that the British had a certain vacillatory approach. They will not get into Kumasi and make any intervention, but they will not also come to fight Asante, even if Asante was plundering itself. In many respects, it is this civil war which persisted in Asante, plus the challenging leadership of Katariki, among other things, that will lead to the depletion of Asante's resources. Two, you will also find that with the depletion of the resources of Asante, the Asante constitution, which they held together, the social contract, which by Asante constitution allowed the state to use a subtle coercion to get members of the state to go to war, had won. Leadership challenge with Katariki, the one who followed after him, and also an intense war, a civil war, which had eaten into the treasury of Asante. In many respects, some have argued that is what will cause Prempeh the First to capitulate. In many respects, I agree in truth with my professor of education that through the task of diplomacy, Prempeh the First would have to save his people from war, because post-1874 and another war just at 1896 would have been too damning and too dangerous for the health and the power of Asante, especially holding it from Kumasi. I will try to just wrap up. I have 1 minute. So, what is my last take on this program? You would appreciate that by 1900, the British had come to town again. They were successful at that because the rally call for people to come to fight did not have that kind of zest. And that is written by McCaskey. Asante will regroup. But we see that even when Asante had been defeated by 1905, President Commissioner Fuller had taken over to behave as if he was an Asante Hene. And even when we heard Asante Hene had returned, he made him Kumasi Hene, a creation by the British. The intrigues by the outsiders is what Asante has sought to cure and has found a balancing act to sustain the union till now. And that's my case there.
Honorable Ministers, clergy, Professor esteemed and distinguished scholar of our scientific history, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great reverence and gratitude that we gather here today to commemorate the indomitable spirit and unwavering dedication of the people of our country, who played a pivotal role during the British and Ashanti War of 1874, popularly referred to as the Sagrenti War. As we delve into the annals of history, we also uncover stories of courage, of compassion, and sacrifice that resonate with the Ashanti nation. My role in this symposium is to discuss the missionary factor in the Sagrenti War. Many scholars such as Eduwanyi, Tom Makaski, Emmanuel Champon, Samuel Kobi, Archbishop Sapon, Radcliffe, Abel Wicks, and many more have handled these very subjects with some level of excellence. I stand on their works to discuss the interest of the Basel missionaries in the war. In the words of Njoku, the colonial enterprise and the Christian missionary enterprise together constitute two of the most important historical events that have, for good or bad, considerably shaped the history of Africa, including Ghana. Both defining events occurred almost simultaneously. The colonial enterprise focused on the economic and political dimensions of life in Africa, redrawing the boundaries, reshaping its political arrangements and structure, and considerably looking at different orientations and vital institutions. The missionary enterprise impacted heavily on the religious and cultural landscape of Africa and considerably tinkered with its dominant worldview and value system. A critical revisiting of these two major events, either separately or as twin events, is crucial and indeed unavoidable for our understanding of the British Ashanti War of 1874, popularly referred to as the Sagrenti War. Ashanti and Britain fought several wars. Those battles were called several names, such as the Battle of the Samanko in 1824, Akatamanso in 1826, Sagrenti in 1874, and the Yah Central War of 1900 and 1901. Prior to the Sagrenti War, Asante had established itself as a powerful political entity with a strong religious and cultural infrastructure. In spite of its greatness, it still fought more wars. The frequency with which Ashanti battled with her neighbors, including Denjira, Fanti, Bono, Ebe, Ghana, Gonja, Dagomba, and many more, will have drawn attention to itself by several observers, especially the British and some missionaries. British administrators seem to have arrived at the conclusion that Asante indeed was a threat to their colonial project. Historians have indicated that some of the wars that were fought between Britain and Asante were in relation to the breach of peace and agreement, and that of 1874 was not an exception. It was born out of the desire to ensure that Asante obeys the peace agreement that it had signed in 1863, not to fight the southern states, and also to end enslavement of people. Achempo, Albert Wills, Tudor, Lewin, and several others have indicated that the Asante British War of 1874 had a kind of crushing military defeat on Asante. Asante got demoralized, and of course the foundation of its very state was shaken. Indeed, the awesome military technology of the British that was deployed was referred to more or less as the total war. Total war because it characterized the sound that was actually coming from the weapons and rifles that were handled by the British. But the question is that if the Sagrenti War was a matter between Britain and British forces and Asante, what triggered the interest of Basel missionaries in the war? A people that were supposed to spread the gospel. To answer this question, we recast our minds to events in early 1868 and again in 1869, when the kingdom of Anglo and Akwamu around the lower Volta declared war on the Ebe of Crepi. In the ensuing war, Asante soldiers sacked Crepi towns, including Sokode, Enum, Ho, and took along with them missionaries, including Ramsey and his people, Johannes, Kuhn, Smith, Richard, and Bram, Ramsey's name. We might begin to wonder why an internal war could lead to the capture of missionaries. One needs to understand actions and events of this nature from the complex relationship that had developed between society, church, and the state. The Christian church in the Gold Coast at that time was lumped with other European agencies such as government and trading firms. The church could hardly be considered by the people in the Gold Coast as an agency with a separate existence. Such was the obvious conclusion to be drawn from missionaries accompanying soldiers on their campaigns and soldiers accompanying missionaries on their mission journeys. There are perfect examples, for example, of Greece, who was accompanied by a soldier up to a Propon from the Danish fort. There's also evidence of free men going to Kumasi accompanied by military officers. As already noted, the first 5 weeks of captivity of Ranzia and his group saw the captives marching at the daily pace of about 30 miles as the journey from Crepi towards Kumasi. This was difficult for European captives who had to walk in the scorching heat from the blazing sun and burning houses. In the process, Ramsey's baby had a fever and Kuhn a deep wound on his heel from heavy chains. Ramsey's son or child died before the captives got to Kumasi in 1870. Their hope of gaining freedom once they got into Kumasi, as they expected, was yet to be realized. The detention dragged on for more than 4 years. In captivity, Ramsey's wife gave birth to a second child. Attempts were made to release the hostages. David Asante of the Basel Mission, in his letter to the captives, highlighted aspects of ransoming operations that had taken place. And I quote, "Twice have we sent messengers to the Ashanti camp offering money for your release, but in vain. I have been sent to Begro on the frontier of Achim to try and come into communication with you as up to the present. We have only heard of reports from you. I give the bearer a pencil, paper, and scissors that you may write or send some of your hair as an assurance that you are still alive in Kumasi." With lack of success on the part of the Basel Christian Mission, the British colonial administration for Gold Coast, who now had responsibility for the key, took charge to secure the release of the captives. One of the first decisions taken was Britain to take possession of Asante captives on the Gold Coast, including Bofo. Bofo's nephew, whom British officers retrieved from Provo in 1869. The plot, it seemed, was to swap captives for the Europeans in Kumasi. Hence, in June 1870, the British governor of Cape Coast, Don Popo Hansen, released and sent to Kumasi a batch of Asante prisoners seized in a previous Asante war around Achin, with a promise to free more of Asante captives upon the release of missionaries. That was also not successful. At another time, he sent Asantehene a gold-embroidered silk worth about 100 pounds. That also did not help matters. Instead, the demand was for 100 ounces of gold, or about 1,440 pounds for each captive that was being held in Kumasi. So fast forward to 1872, Kakari sent the captives to Promena, south of Asante on the River Pearl. And the message to the British administrator was that 1,000 should be paid to Asante agents in Cape Coast per captive so as to seal off the deal. A week later, the captives reached Promena, but before leaving Kumasi, the missionaries had redeemed their 2 African helpers, that is Palmer and his wife Coco, by paying 6 kilograms, drawn on the Basel mission account. As the European captives journeyed to the coast, a British force headed in the opposite direction of the Asante army. The 2 armies clashed in 1874. The British forces seized the captives and led them as free men to Kumasi and to Cape Coast. It is important to highlight at this stage that the missionary factor played a very significant role in the 1874 war. The capture of the missionaries and the ensuing negotiations allowed the British to plan both in terms of personnel and logistics to be able to launch an attack. Also, the frequent correspondences and spy work and the movement of missionaries such as the Asante enabled enough intelligence report to be gathered on Asante and his forces. Apart from this direct contribution to the war, there were equally important insights that are worthy of note as far as the involvement of missionaries is concerned. The support of missionaries for the war was simply to provide them with a clear form and a direct or indirect way for stability and order in the missionary enterprise in Asante. Since the frequent wars between Asante and the people of the coast proved to be unduly disruptive and even explosive for missionary work. It became evident that after the war, some missionaries, such as Ramzia, had some guaranteed territory for them to be able to carry out their conversion works. The interest of missionaries in the war was also due to the intimate relationship between the formal end of the transatlantic slave trade and the beginning of the Christian missionary enterprise in the Gold Coast. Even though slavery had been abolished by the British, in several of their evangelisms, they had come across evidence of existence of slavery in most parts of the Gold Coast, including Asante. Missionaries embarked on campaigns to end slavery by arguing that slaves demand mercy and compassion. In their mission to Ashanti, Sir Ganan Wolseley and his band of fighters projected the war in such grandiloquence so as to gain some sympathy and support from missionaries within the Gold Coast and also outside of the country. These were actually people that were already exposed to a number of abolitionist proposals. Rather than trade in human beings, humanity will profit more in trading in commodities, they added. For the missionaries giving support to the war, it was more or less an obligation for them to be able to pass on Christian faith to Asante. For the missionaries, the defeat of Asante was construed and seen as a kind of remedy for the slave trade and a civilizing mission. This mindset will be put into action immediately after the war, where Basel missionaries converted ex-slaves, some of whom volunteered to be agents of the propagation of the Christian message and values in the dominions of Asante. The interest of missionaries could further be viewed from the perspective of so-called religious and cultural hegemony. Missionaries had the belief that people of Asante and the Gokot deserved a different doctrinal heritage, especially when Asante religion and culture was seen as an exerting overarching influence and authority over the affairs of many of the missionary operations. Asante has several deities and had no problem with bringing in more. For example, Krachidente, Nana Bukum, and several others were part of Asante kingdom. Beyond their own enduring internal conversions and difficulties, the fear and even dread of Asante religious and cultural practice, religious intolerance was, in this case, a very important factor in the interest of the missionaries as far as the Sagrenti War is concerned. The ritual practice and the modes of worship found in the traditional religions was also assumed to be one of the critical factors that made the missionaries to support the Sagrenti War. I'm told I'm done. 1 minute. Oh, okay. Thank you. Now, if I have 1 minute, I better move maybe towards my conclusion. Now, in summary, several factors accounted for the missionary interest in the Sagrenti War, apart from the capture of Ramzia. The need for space to evangelize, the fear of conversion of Asante kings and other notables into Islam, and its attendant consequences of missionary work. The need to maintain some Christian and cultural hegemony in a kingdom that was highly revered and respected among others made the Bashan missionaries to support British forces against Asante in the Sagrenti War. Thank you so much for your attention.
His Royal Highness Otumfuo Osei-Tutu II, Nananom, the Vice Chancellor, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Academics and staff of KNUST, MPs and Ministers of State, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
My dear Prof, we are an institution of learning, higher learning, and today gives us the opportunity to learn our culture at its best. Let's start it all over again with His Royal Majesty.
His Royal Majesty, Nana Otumfuo Osei-Tutu II, Nananom, the Vice Chancellor, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Academics and staff of KNUST, the MPs and Ministers of State, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's an honor to stand before you this morning to give my thoughts on war and diplomacy, especially from the perspective of women. There is an Akan proverb which says that Oba Totua Etrebema. In 1874, an Elmina-born British envoy, Henry Plange, made provocative threats to the Asantehene, Kofi Kakari and the chiefs during the discussion of the British takeover of all Dutch concessions, including the Elmina Castle. Obviously irritated by this, the Asantehima Efiakobi retorted, "I am only a woman, but I will fight the governor with my left hand." These two statements mentioned above provokes an inquiry into an understanding of the place of women in Asante state military structure. How do we reconcile the Asante proverb mentioned with the above statement made by Nana Efiakobi? What specific roles did women play in the Asante military setup? In which ways did religious and cultural beliefs hinder women from full participation in state war machinery? The 18th century were times of state union, expansion, consolidation for the Asante, and a constant feature which facilitated this process was war. Asante embarked on wars for political, economic, and ideological purposes. Analyzing the etymology of Asante, linguists equate the name Asante with war. Kwejo Osei, a known historian, gives two traditions to this effect. The first states that Asante emanates from the name Esan, which simply means war. So it is Asante 4 is the corrupted form of Esa 4. The second tradition also states that Asante was a vassal of Dentra, and Asante used to supply Dentra with red clay, which was known as Esan, used for building of houses. The people became known as Esante 4, which was corrupted to become Asante 4. It is essential to iterate here, especially joining into the conversation of Adi, who states that war essentially elevated men over women. After the Battle of Fediase, Nana Osei the first divided the states politically into different military duties. There was the Adonten, Chafo, Benkum, Nifa, Chidom, Jase, and the Ankobia. All these positions were occupied by men. Though theoretically, the Ohima, that is the co-ruler of the Ohene, could serve as the head of state in the absence of the king. I am then moving on to look at women in the founding of Asante. It is important to highlight the role played by the female ancestors in the founding of Asante. The Oyoko tradition indicates that Antoine and her people descended from the sky near Esiakwa in Achimebuakwa. There is also another tradition which indicates that they descended near Asante Manso. Similar traditions are given by other Matri clans, including Nyankopong Bweshia for the breakthrough, Aso Bode for the Asuna, Amena Jata for the Asenye, and Sena Fontom for the Ebiana. This explains the matrilineal system and why the genealogical descent is traced through the female line. At the core of the socio-political organization was the Abusia, headed by the Abusia Penny and the Oba Penny. The Ohene and Ohima at the highest level of state organization played complementary roles in leadership. The political status was conferred by the Ohima, who also served as the royal genealogist to determine the legitimacy of claims made vacant too. This accounts for the Akan proverb, Obana or Ohene. We are moving on then to look at women and war. Women played crucial roles in war politics in Asante. Nevertheless, their roles are largely ignored and underrated due to Asante's religio-cultural beliefs attached to war and gender. It is important to emphasize that childbearing women did not engage in frontline warfare, not because of their physical inadequacies, but because of the fear of menstrual contamination. Menstruation inhibited women's political progression because of the cultural beliefs attached to it. Though menstrual blood was considered a source of fertility, menstruating women were considered ceremonially unclean. They could not attend social activities in the community, participate in religious ceremonies, honor their ancestors, visit the chief's court, or associate with any male government official. Menopausal women, however, were free from these menstrual taboos, enabling them to take part in ritual, social, and political activities. For an Asante menopausal woman, it was significant because it meant a shift from the normal life to become a respectable elder, Oba Penny. Old women acquired elderly privileges such as the right to cut their hair, the dancing crown, wear their cloth in the male fashion, drink liquor, pour libation, and engage in frontline war. Despite these limitations, women played crucial roles in war in Asante. One of the crucial roles, menopausal and menopausal women performed daily ritual chants, ritual dancing, mimes, and other spiritual performances to enhance the victory of the military in war until the troops returned. These women sometimes pounded empty mortars with pistols as a form of spiritual torture to Asante's enemies. Women also played female captains and the Asafotrema, who were a type of a rear guard. They provided military support services in times such as scouts, carriers, cooks, and provided war logistics. Women provided useful intelligence on strategies and troops of the state. I go ahead to highlight the contribution of three Asante-hima who played very key roles in the history of Asante. These are Efia Kobi, Yecha, and then Yasanswa. Efia Kobi's skill in war and diplomacy is seen in her administrative tact, boldness in the era of crisis in Asante. She was also known as a pacifist and a great woman of a great shrewdness, who projected the unification of Asante above the love for war. On 20th November 1873, at the gathering of the Asanteman in Shiamu, she noted to have said, "From olden times, it has been seen that God fights for Asante if the war is a just one. This one is unjust. I am old now. I lived before Kwekubia, and I have now placed my son on the Asante throne. I do not wish for our ancestors to say my son was the cause of the disturbance of the 60 towns." The council of the military generals superseded hers, leading to the 1874 Sagrenti War with the British, in which Asante was defeated. Nana Kofi Kakari's lack of tact, acumen, and indecision eventually cost him the throne. When Efia Kobi found one of Kofi Kakari's wives wearing the gold ornaments used to bury the deceased Queen Mother, she initiated his deposition, and in his place, Mensa Bonsu was appointed as the Asante-hene. So this ties in with what Professor Makaski said earlier, that when he was enthroned, he misused state resources. In this instance, it can be said that she sought to project her self-interest above in the choice of rulers, because for the second time she put her own son on the throne. To secure the election of her younger son, Mensa Bonsu, as the next Asante-hene, Nana Efia Kobi forged alliances with powerful chiefs, including Bantimahene Nana Uwa II and Kokofu-hene Nana Yaobeko. Nevertheless, her own daughter, Yecha, overthrew and exiled her together with her son, Kakari, in 1884. Efia Kobi is remembered for her dedication to maintaining the ascension of her lineage in Asante. I move on then to look at Yecha. Yecha became the greatest rival of Efia Kobi as she ousted her own mother in 1884. She was known to be a ruthless ruler. She secured the arrest of Kakari in 1884 and ordered his execution. Over 200 Kakari's kindred were also annihilated in the process, though eventually he was spared. Unfortunately, Kwekudria II reigned for only 44 days. After his death, Yecha fought for the stool for her son, Prempe I. Supporters of her opponents, that is, Atrebuana, such as Butuakwa, Ochiame, Jobin, and Samahine Echampompenyi, were all executed in the process. This led to a prolonged war of 4 years, Within the period, she assumed the role as a rival ruler of Asante and took possession of the golden stool so that no opponent could be enthroned. In Asante norms and value systems, the accumulation of wealth played a key role in power struggle. Yechan was a wealthy trader who used her money to finance the ambitions of her children. As a known wealthy woman, Yechan deployed her resources liberally. It was known that she bought loyalty using land. She also acquired a large supply of Sniper rifles and ammunition to aid her self-ambition. As a result, she was given the title Oba Berma. Yechan remained resolutely opposed to British diplomatic missions, including Griffin, Hobson, and Maxwell. This explains why she was targeted for exile together with Prempeh I and other prominent Asantehene, other prominent chiefs in 1896. She died in Seychelles on 2nd September 1917 at the age of 77. I move on to the last heroine in terms of Asante history, that is Yasantua. Yasantua was a formidable-looking woman who had the slogan, "Men are not pillows for any woman to lean against." Yasantua played a pivotal role in galvanizing the Asante into action by challenging male impotency in a time of national crisis. Echampo and Obey emphasized that her devotion to the golden stool, determination and courage contributed to making the war against the British. When her grandson, Nana Kwesi Afrane, the Desohene, was exiled, together with Prempeh I by the British, she openly challenged the demands made by Sir Frederick Hobson for the golden stool. Her devotion for the golden stool and determination contributed to the siege and guerrilla war from April to November 1900. This contributed to her famous statement, "How can a proud and brave people like the Asante sit back and look whilst the white men took away the king and the chiefs and humiliated them with a demand for the golden stool? The golden stool only means money to the white man. They have set for it. I shall not. If you, the chiefs of Asante, are going to behave like cowards and not fight, you should exchange your loincloths for my undergarments." For the sake of time, I'll move on to my conclusion. Within the broader framework of gender and power relations in Asante, women are highly recognized for their roles played in the continuity of their lineages. Because of the matrilineal structure of the Asante people, which centers on the idea that a woman passes her blood to her offspring, this bestows on women recognized political rights. Several queen mothers did not limit their responsibilities to women and domestic affairs, but played crucial roles to enhance national sovereignty. These queen mothers defied gender stereotyping to shape Asante social and political institutions and prove the capability of women despite the religio-cultural ascribed biological limitations as compared to men. In conclusion, while women served limited roles in Asante army due to customary disqualifications and the fear of menstrual taboos, upon reaching menopause, they assumed war politics together with men. As we celebrate the 150 years since the Sagrenti War occurred, it is important that we remember heroines of history, including Efia Kobi, Ya Echan, and Ya Asantua. I guess I will lastly play the devil's advocate here in probing the unsung stories of women. I wonder what the story would have been if these women had told their own stories. Had Yasantua or Yechan been lettered or Western schooled, and had they similar avenues as Nana Ajimai Prempeh the First, while in exile, what stories would they have written about women and war? This leaves much to be desired. And I'll end by saying that as women, it befalls on us to go ahead and write our own.
Thank you all very much. I've received royal instructions that we should end the panel discussion at 1 p.m. That's why I was sending all these timekeeping instructions. So unfortunately, though I had promised Q&A, we will not be able to do Q&A. I beg for indulgence for just 2 or 3 minutes to offer some concluding remarks like academic protocol requires, and then we will thank our panelists and close our symposium. We've had a wonderful couple of hours, beginning with Tom McCaskey's keynote. We've heard about the personal ambitions of individuals, someone like Garnet Wolseley, who was intent on leading the British Army, and the kinds of actions he would take because of his personal ambitions. We've heard of personal predilections, the two brothers, Kofi Kakame, the 1870s, Sagrenti, and how the outcome was almost guaranteed because of British industrial and military superiority. In a sense, it was an unfair war. The timing of the 1880s, the scramble and the petition, will make the difference between 1874. Asante is defeated but not annexed. And the insistence in the 1890s that Asante should come under British suzerainty. So timing is important. War. We've talked about 2 wars, Sagrenti, Yasantwa, but with very different consequences. 1874, Asante is defeated but not annexed. 1900 enabled the British to treat Asante differently from even 1896. Now Asante was a territory of conquest. We cannot talk about Asante today without Christianity, despite the rather ambivalent beginnings of Asante's relations with Christianity. I look at Kumasi today, and almost churches are part of the landscape. I think St. Cyprian's is the Anglican church, right? Which is also the Royal Church. Even Ramsia has a church named after him, which is the one in the room that my mother went to. There's Wellesley, or the Methodist Church, by the prisons. And you have to climb the hill to the Roman hill, to the Roman church. And it is true that the Asante have today indigenized Christianity, as Archbishop Kwesi Sapong affirms. Women are half the population, and we cannot go anywhere without our women. And I've enjoyed listening to Eugenia's reflections on 3 important Queen Mothers, Afia Kobi, Yecha, and then Juso Emaya Santwa. So this silver anniversary is a period of historical reflection and the capacity of history to rejuvenate Asante. Titika Asum, as Nana Dravingine reminded us, and the Asante love history. Please join me in thanking our 4 excellent panelists for their presentation. At this time, we will take our seats so we can go back to our seats, and then Mr. Jerry behind me will take over again.
What shall we say to Prof. Tom McCaskey, Professor Eugene Anderson, Professor Samuel Edudinfi, Professor Samuel Ntabusu, and the masterful moderation from Professor Emmanuel Echampong? Please, a resounding round of applause. We want to thank you ever so much for lending us your mental agilities and fleshing out this book from various perspectives. Let's now go back to 1874, February. Like Dr. Baumia was saying, you and I were not there. But the gods, ancestors, and spirits live in all of us. And for the next few minutes, I want you to lend your very undivided attention to the Kumasi Cultural Center as they reenact February 1874.
Yes. Yes.